Welcome to Inside Out, the Emotional Awareness Podcast, a Mentalus Academy production. Let's learn more about ourselves, inside and out.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast called Inside Out, where we talk about all things related to mental health and wellness. And we have wonderful people who join us on this journey and who bring in particular topics of interest to them. So on that note, today we have Sandra Paget who is here. Hello, Sandra.
Morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, really, truly. Thank you for initiating this wonderful podcast and idea.
With no other hesitation, I will ask you to maybe introduce your topic and what you'd like to talk about today.
So the topic I would like to talk about today in exchange with you, ladies, is harassment in the workplace. That's something that many people are experiencing these days. And I think it's important that we do tools ourselves to better live through it and know the signs and being able to make proper choices to work well where we choose to work.
I couldn't agree more with how you said it, to find tools and make choices, you see, because sometimes it comes to choices.
And I think they're hard choices. And that's one of the things I want to address, ladies, today is how, if you do love what you do, but the workplace, there's certain aspects in the workplace are toxic, how do we deal with that? First of all, how do we pinpoint, yes, it is harassment. No, it is just two personalities hitting it off. How can we identify the psychological harassment? Sexual harassment is another topic, I would say, altogether. But to me, is more about the psychological harassment today I would like to exchange on and better understand. For example, you come in on a regular basis, you say hi to a colleague and she never answers you back. And then you hear later on, well, she never says hi to me. And then it creates a hostile relationship with that person. That's a very simple daily action, reaction. Can it be considered harassment, or it's simply just two people who just don't know how to communicate with each other? Is the question clear?
I think what you addressed here are several things, and I will come back to Daniela will add her perspective. But I think what you've mentioned is the difference between conflict of personalities and harassment in workplace and how to be able to distinguish them, because both can exist. I think what's more important in the harassment part is that it's often continuous. It's often coming back systematically. It's small things that can come. And what I find mostly that kind of differentiate that is when you say to the other person, this is not okay, and the person keep doing it. This is when we kind of start to move, while the other person is not open to, oh, I didn't know that, to address the situation. Daniela?
Yeah, I agree with you, Nedzin. I think that it's sometimes that difference between conflict in the workplace and harassment can be quite thin, like that line can be quite thin, but it is important to be able to differentiate and to understand that harassment is sort of a systematic, constant attempt by the other person, I guess, to diminish the person who's being harassed in one way or another, or isolate them or single them out. So in your example, Sandra, when you say somebody who doesn't say hello, even though you say hello to them, it might be interesting to notice, is this a person who's just doesn't say hello to anybody? Is it particularly directed towards you? Is it meant to feel inadequate in some way? Is there some sort of power dynamic between you and that person? Those are all relevant questions. I don't know if you agree, Nedzin.
I agree. It goes back to what she said of how to pinpoint and how to know the signs. All what you said are kind of signs. Is there a power dynamic? Is there isolation? Is it targeted only me? Am I the only one kind of put aside? Does it systematically makes me feel bad? There is that in the harassment workplace, the idea or the intention of the other person to make the person feel bad or diminish, kind of a bullying. In harassment, there are systematic, either you said sexual or other thing, but there is this idea of putting the other person down, which kind of makes them self-doubt themselves a lot. And this is how it affects people.
Would you say that's the most common psychological effects for harassment for someone's mental health is the feeling bad, feeling isolated, or there's more depth, like it goes further than that, which is already huge?
As you said, it is huge, but I would say this is just the surface. Because when it's repetitive, it starts with self-doubt, it starts with isolation, it starts with alienation, but then it can lead to anxiety, depression, burnout. People go on sick leave because of that. And sometimes they don't even know that it's because of harassment in the workplace. They cannot know the link between the work they've done or how it was at the work and their own personal mental health.
Is it because the brain is just adapting and just going, okay, this is my new reality, the repetition of it. I'm not feeling good in that situation, but I find we have a tendency to give excuses to situation. Give is, I don't know if it's give situation, but, like, or maybe, it's a stressful week for her. She's overloaded. We tend to minimize, I find, over time, those isolated incidents or even repetition incident until one day you go, okay, I'm really not feeling good. So the brain just adapting and covering up for the emotions, or at some point the emotion is taking over where we are tired of it, exhausted, as you say, anxiety towards those kinds of situations or people.
I would say it's not just and at all, it can be both. So go ahead, Daniela.
I was just going to touch on something you said, Sandra, which is that the normalization of it. I don't know if it's necessarily something that happens in our brain, but it is kind of a survival mechanism. We all need to work. And especially if you like what you do at work, then there is this tendency, and it happens by degrees. It's like the famous story of the frog boiling in the pot. Like the temperature keeps rising a little bit each day, and we do have a tendency as part of our survival mechanism to say, okay, it's not so bad, like I can deal with this. And then we don't even notice over time that it just keeps getting worse and worse. But our physical body does realize it. So now all of a sudden, we're not sleeping as well. Thoughts about what's happening at work keep creeping into personal aspects of our life. We start to feel exhausted. We're depressed. We're anxious. And because it's happened so gradually, we don't even know why. And it's become our new normal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Hey everyone, we hope you are enjoying this podcast. Want to find out more about this topic and much more? Check out our courses at Mentalist Academy. Find out more at www.mentalistacademy.com. And now, back to our podcast.
And that being said, it brings me to my next question. At the moment that you do realize it, to do something about it is not that easy, right? It's not that easy because sometimes you're in a huge company where it's less personal, and the issue you have with that person, if you do the step that needs to be done to report it. And I'm not saying it's easier, but it can be more anonymous. But if you are in a small company where you're 5, 10 people, 15 people, where everybody knows each other, knows each other's dynamic, and the people in charge do see it, do see comments, and then you do the steps of reporting it, it becomes a lot more uncomfortable. Where that line, when you realize that you've been harassed, already that's something in itself, I think. Just say, oh my God, I got myself into that. Through time, I've lived it. How did I not see it right away? Why am I still here? Very often you doubt yourself, what you're experiencing. And so to report it because it's the right thing to do for things to change is not that easy. It's actually almost impossible, I would say, because the impact in a small business is greater than maybe in a huge with a lot of people. Is that making sense to you, ladies?
It does make sense. What I would add is that it is difficult whether it's in a small company or in a big company. It is harassment, and it's very similar to aggression. Whether it's physical aggression, sexual abuse, it is an abuse. Harassment is a form of abuse. Small doses over time, but it is an abuse. And it is difficult in the same way that people that live abuse to report that. So it's very difficult. There is the self-doubt, as you've mentioned. There's because it's over time, am I doing correctly when I hurt the other person? What would others think of me? It's a lot, it's charged emotionally.
There's also, I mean, the very real risk that comes with it in a workplace. You know, I mean, there are harassment laws and there's mechanisms in place to report it. That's all true. But the reality of it is that you're still going up against somebody that you work with. You're denouncing them, even if it's anonymously. Sometimes there's still repercussion from it. So it's a very loaded issue for many people. Nobody does this frivolously. It's got a lot of potential consequences. So I understand that it is a very difficult thing to do. On the other hand, and sometimes it leads to this, like if you do everything you're supposed to do in the sense that you report harassment, you're doing it for greater good. It's not just about you. It's about other people in the organization and whatnot. The result may not always be what you would hoped it would be. And so there's that too that has to be taken into account. Ultimately, you kind of have to have in mind that ultimate solution may actually at some point to leave if nothing else works.
Actually, you know what you just said, it's very often that path that is taken of leaving, because to address harassment in the workplace is sort of still taboo. Even though the governments have put in place in September 2024, where each employer has to have a policy and a program in place, I don't think it has been really implemented everywhere. And after just doing the policy, there are steps to be done, and there are like energy to put into it and to believe in it and do the necessary to correct it if needed. But it's hard to undo a culture. In the workplace, it's been there for years. It's not because there's a policy in place that is going to change overnight. And so for those who do experience this, and for those who do also inflict these kinds of situations, there's, I think, a time to adapt to the whole new way of seeing for the employer and the employees the workplace. There are areas like in constructions where there's a culture there that's been for decades how do you undo that? How can we tool ourselves and be patient and know that we are part of the changing process, or we cut ourselves from the changing process and move on to another company, which there are going to be issues. It's not perfect everywhere. So how can we tool ourselves and help others to have the right tools to working through that change? Because it's just starting, I think, in the workplace.
In my experience, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen certain types of businesses which were traditionally thought of as being very, like you said, paying lip service to harassment issues, but not really adapting to them. I've seen them react very strongly to cases of harassment. I've seen them take very decisive action. On the other hand, I've seen other types of businesses that are supposed to be a lot more soft skills, people friendly, etc., who have huge policies in place, very detailed HR commitments and whatnot, take the harassment thing very lightly. Like, for example, sending the person who's reported the harassment back to report to the same person that's been harassing them, as opposed to taking them out of that context and trying to make the situation better and putting the onus on the person reporting to fix the issue, which totally goes against every harassment policy there is. So that's part of the issue. It's hard to tell how any organization is going to react. And that's where, like I said before, ultimately then there has to be, in business terms, they used to call it the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So in other words, if you're aiming for something, you have to have like a second option in your pocket to say, well, if this doesn't work, then I'm going to do that. So at the end of the day, it's kind of like leaving always has to be that second alternative, because otherwise you may find yourself in the same situation all over again. On the other hand, and I tell couples this too, by the way, like at some point, if the relationship just isn't working out and they're taking abuse and whatnot, they can come to couples therapy and they can work on it. But at the end of the day, leaving has to be an option at some point if it's that bad. So I think the same applies for harassment. If, rather than give yourself that ultimate pain that's irreversible, at some point that has to be an option. Now, that being said, there are mechanisms in place, and they should be in place, and they should be following the letter of the law. What happens in practice? Not always the same thing. I don't know if you agree with that, Nedzin.
Yeah, Daniela is coming from a corporate perspective as well. I would say in a personal perspective, it comes back to, at the end, what is it that I accept to take? What is it that I'm willing to accept in this? Because even if I love my job, if I'm dreading coming to my job every day, if I'm having anxiety, or if I wake up on Monday morning and it's like, I want to kill myself because I have to go to the job, what is there to take? I find when you say tools, I find to start by acknowledging that there is harassment is a big step. It is a big step for us, as you said. I have been experiencing that, which is very hard on us to accept that this is what I've been through. I find to acknowledge that what's been happening, how it has been happening, is a big start, and getting ourselves out of it, which can be also hard because you kind of doubt yourself constantly. What can I do? What will I do? When am I doing it right? Am I not doing it right? So it kind of triggers this mechanism in you that makes that this is what I'm going to do very hard. So taking a decision in that term becomes even harder, regardless of the decision. Staying, leaving, feeling compliant, you see, all decisions start to become shady. I don't know if it makes any sense.
It does. And it makes me think of another question. If the person who is living the harassment decide to keep her head high and keep her positive energy towards her work and life, and comes in and just go about it in that frame of mind, trying not to have it affect her, is it just putting her head in the sand, or is being a sort of passive aggressive towards the person who is generating this harassment by just saying you're not going to affect me, sort of like ignoring your attitudes on a daily basis? Or is it a good tool just to keep yourself sane in the process of going through that on a daily basis?
I think what you've mentioned here is there is a thin line between being in denial and putting your head in the sand and actually not being affected by this person. If you are faking the behavior, it means it's affecting you. You are kind of putting your head in the sand. If you really get to that place where she can say good morning or he can say good morning or not, I truly, genuinely don't care. This is a coping mechanism, a healthy kind of coping mechanism.
It is a coping mechanism. So does that mean that it's healthy?
It's healthy if it's really working. I don't know what you think, Daniela, if it's healthy or not, but
I think it also depends quite a bit on the circumstance. So, for example, if you have a coworker that you see every day, but you don't have any necessarily personal links with them, you don't really collaborate with them much except on very specific things. Like, let's say, I don't know, you're in accounting and you only have to see that coworker when you have to fill out a report and you have to ask them for their input. They give you their input and you go on with your day. That's one thing, because then there's really no repercussion on you other than the fact that it's just uncomfortable to have them not say good morning when everybody else does. On the other hand, if this coworker is your direct superior and they say everybody else and they invite everybody else to lunch, but they don't invite you, and, you know, when you walk into their office, all discussion stops and everybody stops talking. Now, that's not something you can just turn around and say, you know what, I'm just going to ignore that. So it's very circumstance dependent too, as well as whether it's true that you feel that way or not. Does that make sense?
Yes, because now you're giving me different scenarios, which I think people that are listening to the podcast will identify to one scenario to the other. In my case, I deal with this person on a daily basis. That person talks to me rudely, like on a daily basis, and she's over friendly. I find over friendly, but she's very friendly and she talks about her life to everybody. She's a very chatty person. And so you can actually hear and see the different attitude on a daily basis. It's, the hello is just the context into getting, but it's more than just the hello. And I think yes, to some degree, it does affect me, because I personally don't think this should be anywhere in life. We don't live on a boat, right? We live in society where we each have our own background and history and our little bruise or big bruise within. But I do think to be civil to each other, to have a tone, not necessarily you're my best friend. I have amazing friends. And so I'm not necessarily looking to make friends, you know, like long-time friends, but I do want a respectable relationship with my coworkers. And in my case, clear difference when she addresses me and when she addresses anybody else. And since it's in an open space, you hear and you see. So to which degree, I'm asking myself, I am honest with myself to say it affects me a little bit or this much, which is like a higher level, or even though I have a positive attitude and I come in and I'm happy to see most of my colleagues, and I'm looking forward to the future because right now where I'm working, there's a transition, and that transition, I'll be part of that transition, and that motivates me to keep going. So I feel like I'm still, Sandra, in a good place with my set of mind, my feelings, but do I create an impact within that I'm not realizing to a degree where at some point I'll get to a level of anxiety or depression that I'm not going to see coming? Is that making sense?
Yes. And it's very hard to know in advance. But I mean, there is obviously, from what you're saying, some kind of, let's say, maybe it's not harassment. There's a distinguishing between how she behaves with others and how she behaves with you. And just by saying that, we are kind of a human creature, the social creatures. So we look for connection and we look to being together. And that makes it like, it's kind of rejection. I'm saying hi to everyone, not to you. So because it's an open space, you can see it. And whether we like it or not, it kind of triggers those feelings in us. Rejection, abandonment. How do we react to that? How do we cope with that? And what is our tendency to cope with that? You see, this is what came to me when I heard you, Daniela.
And as I heard you describe it, Sandra, it really came to mind. Like, it is a form of bullying.
It is.
It's not direct aggression, like nobody's pushing you down the stairs or anything like that. But exclusion is a form of bullying because we are such social creatures, because connection and belonging is so important to us. The act of someone excluding us feels very much like bullying. So as you said, it's not so much that maybe for today, you're okay. It's not great. It's not fantastic to go to work in the morning and live this every day, but it doesn't really affect you as a person. Like you said, you have good friends, you have a good social network. It's okay. But over time, the consistency of it and the fact that it's always there can really start to, it's like having a very loud noise in the background all day long. You could stand it for a little while, and then after a while, it just starts giving you headaches. Your neck hurts and all kinds of things like that. So that's what happens. It's a long-term additive process of this constant bullying.
What you're saying is that it doesn't not only have an effect on our emotions, our energy, but physically, there are symptoms that could come out of it. And we don't know the sources at the beginning, but if we are investigating, especially combined with the help of someone like you ladies, we would be able to connect the dots between the situation and the tools or the protections we've developed to cope with the situation. And then we are going to start to feel not only our energy, our emotions, our brains, but also physically aches and pains that can be triggered by these kinds of situations.
Totally. The body feels it, if not at the same time, even before the brain catches. So even if you trying to say it's okay, there is a reaction in your body, a protective one, of course. There is some tension there that is created, and that tension over time gets built into some pain, some headache, some tension in the shoulders, sometimes ulcers, sometimes, and these tensions, physical tensions, also comes to anxiety, depression, or other symptoms.
That's quite interesting. I think we should broadcast that very loudly to people, because very often I think we minimize the impact of accepting a situation for ourselves, for our body, for our mind, for our soul. We tend to want to endure, which I think we shouldn't. I'm saying this very loudly, knowing that I'm doing the opposite. But it's interesting to hear you ladies saying that it's got an impact on the body before we even realize there's an impact happening. And I think that we should be conscious of that, so that when we realize it, we know there's already something happening and that we have to take actions for our own well-being before thinking of others. Is that making sense?
Yeah, and that's actually a good way to segue back to what you first started with, which is this idea of how do we recognize it, harassment? How do we recognize when it's happening? And I would say one of the ways that we can tune in is to tune into our bodies. How do you feel when you're at work and this is happening? Like, what's going on in your body? Like, do you start to feel tense? Does your stomach start to build up more acid? Are you starting to feel lightheaded, or does every part of your body just want to run out of the room, for example? That's how we feel it in our body first. Nadine's more the expert on this than I am.
Trust, Daniela, with what you said. I have to say it. It came from you, not from me.
In a good way.
Yes, I think so. And you see, when you say we have to endure, while I was listening to you, it's like you want to fit in a small box and you kind of pull yourself into those spaces. I don't think anybody should do that. I mean, I know we don't live on a rainbow. I know every job has its ups and lows, but I find there is, just by saying that, there is an aggression there to ourselves. This is what I think. And I know there are life factors we cannot just leave every job we have. But I mean, just listening to that, for me, it's like, that is painful to go through.
It's still a challenge, though. You know, you tool yourself. We listen to this podcast. We, at the end of this podcast, okay, I'm going to do this and that. But then on a daily basis, we have to be able to remind ourselves not to let the daily life and the routine and the comfort versus what's not so comfortable, and remind ourselves to put us first and sort of like scan what's going on to make sure we're going in the right direction. But it's hard to do that on a daily basis. It's very hard.
We have to be kind to ourselves too, right? Like, otherwise we become our own bullies if we tell ourselves, no, like, you have to constantly be checking in with yourself. And sometimes we just can't. Sometimes, like, it's just all we can do to survive our day. And that's okay. And other days we might be more amenable to checking in with ourselves and saying, no, that didn't feel good. I don't like this, and I'm going to do something about it. So I think there's a lot of self-compassion there too, to say, we're not going to be perfect with this every day. These are tools. These are ways to help ourselves, but it's okay if we can't. It's like a muscle, you know, we work on it, but it's okay if we're not perfect from day one.
So for everybody listening, it's okay not to be perfect. I think it's a key message, anyway, for on the other side of the therapist. Just a human being without any expertise in that regard, things not to be perfect. But you do have to remind ourselves that it's okay not to be perfect.
And I think we have to remind ourselves also that it's okay if you don't take a decision now, because we do what we can with what we can. Sometimes we get to the point that we know we're being bullied, we know, but we don't have it in us yet to make any action. And that's okay, you see, in the same sense of self-kindness and self-compassion. Because doing steps can be more aggressive than what is actually now happening. And I mean, yeah, okay. Just to be aware of all of that is huge.
On a very technical, practical way, if your employer or your human resources not well equipped to put in place or to support your situation, UNSST is a good place to express it, to communicate, how can someone who first is uncomfortable doing it in the workplace for whatever reason, does she have an external resource to do so?
There are other resources. I don't think I'm, or Daniela, if you can speak, but I mean, I don't think I'm in a place where I can say this NSST is a good place or not. This is not for us to go about that. There are other resources. I think there are resources, whether it's at lawyers can help, other institutions. There are also some free advice that might be given from people who are more equipped than us to tell you what are the resources. But I mean, this is practical for me to be able to reach that point takes a lot internally to be able to do that. I don't know what you think, Danielle.
Yeah, I think, as you said, in Quebec, certainly the CNSST has resources that and guides and whatnot that help explain better what is legally defined as harassment and whatnot. Lawyers specialized in that as well. But it's once you get to that point, that means you've already kind of decided that this is what's happening and you want to take the next steps, or at least learn about what the next steps might be. Prior to that, there is this sort of self-awareness that has to happen that says, okay, this is what I'm feeling, this is what's happening, and where do I want to go with this?
More and more businesses in their help package do have mental health support. Would you suggest for those experiencing harassment in the workplace to seek that support before making a complaint, for them to maybe demystify or to just have a better understanding of what they think they're experiencing, living?
I certainly think that it's beneficial for anyone to be able to have that external sort of sounding board with, I think what you're referring to is employee assistance programs, I guess. So there's certainly no harm in turning to that kind of help to help you sort out what's going on for yourself. I mean, they're not going to be the ones, however, to give you advice on how to proceed because that's not necessarily their field of expertise. So it depends what you're looking for. Certainly, if you're looking for help from a mental health perspective or from a workplace perspective, that could be of assistance. I don't know. What do you think, Nidzin?
Yeah, and I think, as you said, Daniela, there is the mental health perspective and the legal business perspective. I can speak more for the mental health perspective, which I find once you reach that point to denounce, because it's not easy, that is a big step. So as Daniela said, you have acknowledged there has been harassment, this is what I've been experiencing, you have documented it, and then you presenting yourself with that. But what I find important to say is that this is another hard step. Yeah, going forward with that is never easy, but it can be done. I'm not saying that to discourage anyone, but just to be able to know that it comes with its own mental health struggles.
What gives you hope in that issue? Both of you. What do you think that is already there to help or should be there to help to give you hope that people are going to deal with this issue less and less because there is going to be a better culture or an understanding about this kind of issues in the workplace?
I think it is hopeful to see that companies and businesses have taken this much more seriously over the years. I think there is definitely much more awareness out there of what these issues are and what they mean. I think, and this is purely on a pragmatic point of view, because we all know that businesses tend to look at the bottom line more than anything else. I think businesses are now much more aware of the long-term consequences of psychological harassment in the workplace. So whether that means that they end up losing people on burnout leave or on sick leave or whatnot. So I think it's finally seeping in that prevention is much better than dealing with the consequences. So if your choice is to have 5 of your employees go out on burnout leave because their supervisor is just generally psychologically harassing or gaslighting or whatever you want to call it, everybody in the department, I think now there's much more of an awareness. So that gives me hope. I think there's also much more awareness on the individual's part as to I am being harassed and this is what it feels like. I think in the past, a lot of people would have just felt that it was their own personal weakness somehow that they couldn't just deal with it. So I think that's changing, and the laws have also progressed quite a bit.
For me, I find that it's personal awareness. I believe in the human being, that we are the change we can.
I love that. Can we end with that? That's amazing. Emotion. Yeah, I believe in the human being too. Yeah. This is a wonderful experience to be able to pick the brains of the two of you. See, it's quite something. Usually when you're in therapy, it's the other way around. You got someone pick it at your brain or your body, your state of mind and all that. And it's the reverse. So it's quite interesting. Thank you very much, ladies.
Well, thank you very much for joining us.
See you next time. Find out more at www.mentalizedacademy.com.